Life has thrown me more challenges than blessings, but along the way, I've found moments of grace. Losing my parents at a young age left an ache that never quite faded. But I was lucky to have neighbors like the Parkers, an elderly couple who took me in and treated me with love that felt almost like family. They gave me a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a long time. We didn't have much money, but we had plenty of warmth, and that was all that mattered. Just when I thought I had found stability, tragedy struck again. On the cusp of adulthood, when I was turning 18 and dreaming about college, the Parkers were killed in a car accident. It was devastating to lose the only family I had left. They left me with a modest inheritance, enough for school, and their small, cozy house in the suburbs. As much as I loved that house, it carried too many memories. So, I sold it, using the money to buy a small apartment in the city close to the college where I had enrolled to study financial management. For a while, it felt like I was finally getting my footing. College was tough but rewarding, and I threw myself into learning everything I could about finances and markets. After graduating, I landed a stable job, which kept me busy during the day. Life was fine, functional, even, but nights were a different story. The city, with all its noise and people, could feel unbearably lonely. It was at a party that I met Tom. He wasn't the kind of guy to blend into the background. Loud, funny, and unapologetically himself, he was the life of the gathering. We met when he accidentally knocked into me, spilling my drink all over my shoes. "Watch where you're going," I snapped, trying to sound annoyed but mostly startled. My bad," he said with a mischievous grin. "Let me make it up to you." "What were you drinking?" "Just a beer," I replied, still trying not to smile. "2 beers coming up," he declared, already heading to the makeshift bar. That was Tom, straightforward and completely unpretentious. We spent the rest of the night talking about everything under the sun, from old black and white movies to how much we both despised sushi. Conversation with him felt so easy, and by the end of the night, I found myself not wanting to say goodbye. A year later, Tom proposed, and in typical Tom fashion, it was delightfully simple. No grand gestures, no elaborate planning, just the two of us sitting on the couch watching TV, when he suddenly pulled out a ring. "Marry me," he blurted, gripping the ring like it might vanish if he let go. I couldn't help but laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly yes. "Yes, of course, you big goof," I said, sealing the moment with a smile. Getting married didn't shake up our lives all that much at first. Tom and I continued being the same pair we'd always been. Only now there was a certificate binding us legally. Living together in my small city apartment, we kept close to the busy pace of urban life, but found solace in each other. The nights that used to feel lonely and hollow were now warm and filled with shared laughter. It felt like life was finally falling into place. Married life brought comfort. But life has a funny way of throwing challenges just when you think everything's settled. Tom's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, were some of the kindest people I'd ever met. From the moment Tom brought me to meet them, they made me feel like I belonged. Their suburban home was warm and welcoming, just like them. It was easy to see where Tom had gotten his carefree and cheerful attitude. Their kindness was something I hadn't realized I needed, a balm for the ache I carried from losing my own family. "We're so glad you're part of our family now," Mrs. Dawson would say, holding my hand with genuine warmth that left me both grateful and a little emotional. "Thank you. That means so much to me," I'd reply, truly appreciating their acceptance and care. Visiting them became a treasured weekend tradition. We'd spend sunny afternoons grilling in their backyard or sipping coffee at the kitchen table, chatting about everything and nothing. For a while, it felt like life couldn't get better. But life has a way of proving you wrong. Tom was offered a career-boosting opportunity that required him to leave for an out-of-state business trip. He'd be gone for a year. It was too good to pass up, and though I supported him, the timing couldn't have been worse. Shortly after Tom left, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson's health took a sharp turn for the worse. It all happened so quickly. Mrs. Dawson called me one day, her voice trembling with worry. "Grace, I hate to ask this of you, but we really need help. Mr. Dawson isn't doing well." And I just can't do it alone anymore, she said, her words weighed down by unshed tears. I didn't hesitate. Packing a bag, I headed straight to the suburbs. When I arrived, seeing Mr. Dawson's fragile state hit me hard. He had always been the rock of their family, strong, dependable, and full of life. Now he was thin and frail, surrounded by medical equipment keeping him tethered to the world. I quickly adjusted to the rhythm of their home, taking over the cooking and cleaning so Mrs. Dawson could focus on caring for her husband. In the evenings, I would sit by Mr. Dawson's bedside, reading aloud from his favorite books. His once booming voice had faded to a whisper, but he still managed to thank me on his better days. "Thank you, Grace," he'd say, his words soft but sincere. "It's truly my pleasure," I'd reply, squeezing his hand in an attempt to offer him some comfort. Despite the challenges, I found purpose in being there for them during their time of need. One quiet afternoon, while I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, Mrs. Dawson joined me, her face weary and etched with worry. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her hands nervously twisting together. "Grace, I hate to bring this up, but we're in a bit of a bind," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Dawson was our main breadwinner, and now, well, things have become really tight. I stopped chopping and turned to her, giving her my full attention. She looked down, clearly embarrassed as she continued. "I hate to even ask, but do you think you could rent out your apartment? The income could help us get through this rough patch." I didn't need to think twice. "Of course, Mrs. Dawson. I'll take care of it right away," I assured her, trying to ease the burden she carried. The apartment was rented out faster than I expected, and soon, the rental income was being sent directly to Mrs. Dawson every month. I also began covering the groceries and other bills that started piling up. It wasn't easy. The commute to my job in the city became grueling, stretching my days unbearably long. But I reminded myself constantly that family sticks together, even when the weight feels almost too much to bear. "You're a godsend, Grace," Mrs. Dawson would often tell me, her gratitude evident every time I handed her the money. "It's what family does," I'd respond, smiling through the fatigue. But in the quiet moments, lying in the guest room at night, I couldn't ignore the heaviness pressing down on me. Listening to the faint hum of distant city sirens, I felt the strain of balancing work, caregiving, and the sacrifices I'd made for the Dawson family. Tom's phone calls became my only escape, a brief window into another life. "How are things holding up, Grace?" he'd ask, his concern breaking through the crackling long-distance line. "We're managing," I'd reply, forcing a cheerfulness I didn't always feel. "You just focus on work, okay? Don't worry about us." Life in the Dawson household took a dramatic turn when Emily, Mrs. Dawson's daughter from her first marriage, showed up out of the blue. From the moment she walked through the door, the atmosphere shifted. Emily had a sharp presence, like a cold breeze creeping into a warm room. I'd only met Emily a handful of times before, and even then, I'd sensed the underlying tension in her interactions with Mr. and Mrs. Dawson. According to Tom, she and her stepfather had a rocky relationship, and her visits were rare and filled with friction. At that point, I was already stretched to my limit. Between my long work hours, the exhausting commute, and the increasing demands of caring for Mr. Dawson, life felt overwhelming. Emily's arrival only added to the chaos. Her icy demeanor and subtle criticisms made the house feel heavier, and I quickly realized her presence was going to make an already challenging situation much harder. It became painfully clear that Emily was settling in for the long haul, acting as though the house was her kingdom. Every interaction with her was like stepping on eggshells, but I kept my composure. One particularly exhausting evening, as I was tidying up the living room after dinner, Mr. Dawson weakly gestured for me to come closer. His frail hand trembled as he reached out, and his voice was barely audible. "Grace," he rasped, his words heavy with urgency, "you need to watch out for Emily. She's not here for good reasons. She's a very bad person." His warning sent a chill through me, tying a knot in my stomach. I gently placed my hand on his. "I understand, Mr. Dawson. I'll be careful," I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure what danger I was agreeing to guard against. Not long after, Emily's true colors began to show. The first sign came one morning as I found her casually lounging in the kitchen, sipping coffee like she owned the place. "Just so we're clear," she began, her tone sharp and condescending, "I'm not here to play housemaid or chef for anyone." Her words hung in the air like a slap, but I swallowed my irritation. "Okay, Emily. I've been managing just fine. And I'll continue to handle things," I replied evenly, trying to keep the peace. "Good," she snapped, narrowing her eyes. "Because this is Mom's house, not yours. You're just a helper here." Her disdain was palpable, and I could feel her measuring every word to sting. From that moment on, Emily made sure her dominance was felt. She ordered takeout for herself and her mother, deliberately excluding me. Empty containers were left on the counter for me to clean up, her actions radiating entitlement. Late at night, I'd overhear her whispering to Mrs. Dawson. The once warm woman I had grown close to began to pull away. Her glances became colder, and the little acts of gratitude she used to show me dwindled to almost nothing. "Grace, why don't you sit and eat with us tonight?" Mrs. Dawson offered one evening, a faint flicker of her former kindness in her voice. Before I could respond, Emily interjected, her tone laced with false concern. "Oh, Mom, Grace has been working so hard. She probably prefers eating later. Let her rest." Her words weren't meant to offer me kindness, but to reassert her control, and I could feel the subtle jab. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension. A few weeks later, Mr. Dawson passed away. The funeral was somber, and Tom flew in just in time to say goodbye. It was the first time we'd been together in months, and his presence was a small comfort amidst the grief. Yet, even during such a solemn occasion, I could feel the shift in the air at the Dawson household. Emily was on her best behavior, her facade of politeness almost convincing. She greeted guests with a warm smile and appeared attentive to her grieving mother. "How's everything been while I've been away?" Tom asked me quietly during a rare moment we had alone after the service.
"Fine," he replied, forcing a tight smile.
"Everything's been fine." But he wasn't convinced. "Are you sure? You look worn out." His brow furrowed as he studied my face. "It's just been busy," I said, brushing off his concern. "Helping out around here, you know." I avoided his gaze, unwilling to burden him further. He had enough on his plate, mourning his father. This wasn't the time to unravel the tangled web of tension brewing in his family home. But deep down, I knew this calm wouldn't last for long. Emily's presence was a storm waiting to break. Emily's behavior grew worse by the day. She strutted around like a queen, her entitled smirk never far from her lips. Any time I tried to defend myself, she'd twist my words and turn Mrs. Dawson even more against me. One day, I overheard their conversation in the kitchen while I scrubbed the living room floors. "She's useless, Mom," Emily sneered. "Why is she even still here? You don't owe her anything. Let her go." Mrs. Dawson sighed, her voice weary. "You're right. Grace is nothing but a burden now." I froze in place, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but I held my tongue. It wasn't the time, not yet. Late one night, unable to sleep, I decided to check the household accounts. Over the past year, I had handed over a significant amount of money for my rental income. Yet, as I sifted through the records, it became clear that a large portion of it had been spent on frivolities, luxury items, and expensive takeout meals. Emily's name appeared on every transaction, her spending habits wild and unchecked. She had drained the funds I'd provided, leaving almost nothing for actual necessities. I was furious but not surprised. Emily had been bleeding the household dry while accusing me of freeloading. The next morning, I confronted Mrs. Dawson about it. "Mrs. Dawson, can we talk?" I asked cautiously, holding the ledger in my hands. She glanced up from her cup of coffee, her expression impatient. "What is it, Grace?" "I've been reviewing the finances. The money I've been contributing, it's all gone. Most of it was spent on things that weren't necessary." I can't keep supporting the household like this if it's being misused. Mrs. Dawson's face twisted in anger. How dare you accuse us of misusing your money? We've done more for you than you deserve. Grace, you've done more for me? I asked, my voice rising. I've sacrificed my time, my home, and my income to help this family. And this is how you repay me. Emily sauntered into the room, smirking as if she'd been waiting for this confrontation. Don't act so high and mighty, Grace. You're just a tenant here, a temporary one at that. I'm done, I said, my voice firm. I'm moving out, and I'm cutting off all financial support. You'll have to figure things out on your own from now on. Mrs. Dawson's face went pale. You can't do that. We rely on that money. That's not my problem anymore, I replied, standing my ground. Emily laughed mockingly. Good luck out there, Grace. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. The next day, I packed my things and left the Dawson household for good. I moved back into my apartment, where I could finally breathe freely. It was a relief to escape their toxicity, though part of me felt a pang of guilt for breaking my promise to Mr. Dawson. But I realized that staying in that house had been destroying me, and I couldn't honor his memory by sacrificing my own well-being. As for Emily and Mrs. Dawson, their house quickly fell into disrepair without my help. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were struggling financially, with no one left to bail them out. Meanwhile, I found peace in my quiet apartment, rebuilding my life on my own terms. For the first time in years, I felt free. I took a deep breath, unsure of how to start. It's Emily, I began, my voice shaky. And your mom, too. They've been plotting against me, Tom. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? What kind of plotting? I explained everything. The whispers in the kitchen, the cruel remarks, and the bombshell I overheard about them wanting me to sell my apartment and hand over the money. As I spoke, Tom's face darkened with anger. They said they deserved to live better. I finished, tears welling up in my eyes. Tom, they don't care about me, they never did. And your mom, she's changed. She's not the same person I knew. Tom ran a hand through his hair, clearly furious but trying to keep calm for my sake. I can't believe this, he muttered. Emily, I expected, but my mom? I don't even recognize her anymore. I didn't know where else to go, Tom. I said, my voice breaking. I had to get out of there. I was scared of what they'd try next. He reached over and took my hand. You did the right thing coming here, Grace. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that. But you're safe now, okay? You're with me. His reassurance was like a weight lifted off my chest. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. The next morning, Tom wasted no time confronting his mother and Emily. He called them, his tone icy and direct. Mom, Emily, I know what's been going on, he said. Grace told me everything. How could you treat her like that? There was a long pause before Mrs. Dawson responded, her voice defensive. Tom, you don't understand. We've been struggling. Struggling. Tom cut her off. Grace has been giving you money every month, Mom. She rented out her apartment and commuted for hours just to help you. And Emily, she's done nothing but take advantage of her kindness. Emily's voice chimed in, smug and unapologetic. Oh, come on, Tom. She's just overreacting. Grace was freeloading off us anyway. She was helping you, Emily, and you plotted to take her apartment from her? Unbelievable. The conversation ended with Tom cutting them off mid-excuse, refusing to hear any more. In the weeks that followed, Tom and I focused on rebuilding. We decided it was best to distance ourselves from his family, at least for a while. I moved back into my apartment, and Tom came to stay with me temporarily to help me settle in. Emily and Mrs. Dawson tried reaching out multiple times, but their messages were filled with fake apologies and attempts to guilt us. Tom didn't budge, and neither did I. One day, while unpacking some of my things, Tom sat down next to me and took my hand. Grace, I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, because of my family. You didn't deserve any of it. It's not your fault, Tom, I replied. But thank you for standing by me. It means everything. From that moment on, we started to heal. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. With Tom by my side, I knew I was finally free from the toxicity that had consumed my life at the Dawson household. And I was ready to move forward, stronger than ever. In the following days, the tension eased as Tom and I focused on rebuilding our lives together. Cutting ties with his family wasn't easy for him, but he never wavered in his decision to protect me and prioritize our relationship. Tom officially ended all financial support to his mother and Emily, refusing to let them manipulate or guilt-trip him anymore. Predictably, the backlash came swiftly. Mrs. Dawson called multiple times, leaving voicemails ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas. "Tom, you can't just abandon your family like this. We need your help," her voice crackled through one message. Emily wasn't any better. She sent a barrage of text messages, demanding to know how Tom could side with me over his real family. Her words were sharp and cruel, but Tom deleted each one without a second thought. "It's unbelievable how entitled they are," Tom said one evening, shaking his head. "They don't realize that they're the ones who pushed us to this point." Meanwhile, I started making changes of my own. I moved back into my apartment and began redecorating the space, turning it into a sanctuary that truly felt like home. Tom helped me paint the walls, hang new curtains, and pick out furniture that suited both our styles. "This place looks amazing, Grace," Tom said one evening as we stood in the freshly decorated living room. "It feels like a fresh start." "It does, doesn't it?" I agreed, feeling a renewed sense of hope. With the toxic influence of Emily and Mrs. Dawson behind us, Tom and I grew closer than ever. We spent our evenings cooking together, watching old movies, and dreaming about the future. One day, as we were sorting through some old boxes, Tom came across a framed photo of his family from years ago. He stared at it for a long moment before setting it aside. "Do you think they'll ever change?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But even if they don't, we've already made the right choice for us." He nodded, his expression thoughtful.
"Yeah,
"You're right. They had their chance, and they blew it. We're better off this way." With time, the calls and messages from his family grew less frequent until they stopped altogether. It was clear they'd given up on trying to manipulate us, and the silence was a welcome relief. Tom and I built a life rooted in mutual respect, love, and understanding, free from the shadows of manipulation and greed. Looking back, the ordeal with Emily and Mrs. Dawson had been a painful chapter in our lives. But it taught us both the importance of standing up for ourselves and protecting what truly mattered. And as we sat together on the balcony of our cozy apartment, watching the sunset, I knew we were finally where we were meant to be. Together, stronger, and at peace. From that moment, I felt an immense weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter of Mrs. Dawson and Emily in my life was officially closed. They had made their decisions, and I had made mine, to prioritize my peace, my family, and my future. Tom was my rock throughout it all, standing by me as we built the life we truly wanted. Our little house in the suburbs became our haven. It wasn't extravagant, but it was warm and filled with love. Months later, as we brought our baby home for the first time, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought us to this moment. Tom held our newborn daughter with a tenderness I had never seen before. His eyes filled with tears of joy. "She's perfect," he whispered, glancing at me with a smile. "She is," I agreed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. The struggles, the betrayals, the heartbreak, it all felt like a distant memory. Every challenge had shaped me into a stronger, more resilient person, ready to embrace the happiness I had now. We named our daughter Hope, because that's what she represented: a fresh start, a brighter future, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward. As Tom and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset with our little bundle of joy, I realized I had finally found the peace and family I had always longed for. Sometimes, walking away is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most necessary step toward a better life. And in the end, I didn't just walk away, I thrived. With every passing day, our lives became more intertwined with happiness and purpose. Tom and I put our focus on raising Mia in a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the security we had both craved for so long. The house we bought wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect for us. A cozy kitchen where we shared breakfasts, a sunny garden where Mia would one day play, and a small porch where we could sit and reflect on how far we had come. Emily's downfall and Mrs. Dawson's hardships rarely crossed our minds anymore. They had made their choices, and we had made ours, to prioritize our family and leave behind the bitterness of the past. Occasionally, whispers of Emily's trial or Mrs. Dawson's struggle would come up in conversation with acquaintances, but they felt like echoes from another life. I no longer felt anger or resentment, only a quiet acceptance that some chapters in life must close for others to flourish. Do you ever think about them? Tom asked one evening as we sat under the stars with Mia tucked in bed. Sometimes, I admitted, but not with regret. We made the right decision for us, and I'm at peace with that. Me too, Tom said, taking my hand. We're building something beautiful here, Grace. And that's all that matters. Mia grew, and with her came countless joys, her first steps on the garden grass, her laughter filling the house, her tiny arms wrapping around us with unconditional love. Watching her discover the world was like rediscovering it ourselves. One afternoon, as Mia played with a colorful quilt I had sewn for her, I thought about how much life had changed. The girl who once felt so alone, moving from one loss to another, had found a family, a purpose, and a happiness that couldn't be stolen by anyone or anything. Tom walked in, smiling as he scooped Mia into his arms. "We did good, didn't we?" he asked, beaming. "We did," I said, my heart full. Our pasts may have been complicated, but the present was everything I had ever hoped for. And the future? It was ours to shape, together.